Somewhere in the hills of Kentucky, behind a granite fortress wrapped in steel and surrounded by 30,000 active duty soldiers, sits a vault that no sitting president has ever entered. Not a single journalist has photographed its interior, and not a single civilian has walked its corridors in nearly half a century. Inside that vault, the United States government claims to store roughly 4,500 tons of gold bullion, worth somewhere north of $400 billion at current market prices. That makes it the single largest concentration of gold on the face of the earth. But here is what makes this place truly strange. Despite holding a fortune that could buy entire countries, only a handful of people alive today have actually seen the gold with their own eyes. That was in 1974. That was the last time. And the questions surrounding what really sits inside those walls have only grown louder in the decades since. This is the story of the United States Bullion Depository, better known as Fort Knox. And the deeper you look, the stranger it gets. If you had driven through northern Kentucky in the early 1930s, you would have seen rolling farmland, small towns, and not much else. Hardin County was quiet, rural, and completely unremarkable. Nobody living there at the time had any reason to believe their backyard was about to become the most secure building ever constructed by the American government. But they also could not have predicted what was happening in Washington, because in 1933, the United States was falling apart. The Great Depression had gutted the economy. Banks were collapsing by the hundreds. Bread lines stretched around city blocks in New York, Chicago, and Detroit. Families who had saved for decades lost everything overnight when their banks simply ceased to exist. Unemployment had climbed above 25%, and President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, newly inaugurated and facing a nation on the verge of total economic collapse, was desperate for solutions. He needed to stabilize the dollar, and to do that, he needed gold, a lot of it. So he did something no American president had ever done before. On April 5, 1933, Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. That order made it illegal for private citizens to hoard gold. Every American holding gold coins, gold bullion, or gold certificates was required to surrender them to the Federal Reserve, not some of it, all of it. The penalty for refusing was a fine of up to $10,000, which in today's money would be well over $200,000 and up to 10 years in federal prison. The government was not asking, it was demanding, and Americans complied because they had no choice. Within months, the Federal Reserve had collected an enormous quantity of gold from citizens, businesses, and banks all across the country. But now the government had a problem. All of this gold needed to go somewhere. The existing treasury vaults in places like New York City, Philadelphia, and Denver were already stretched to capacity. And the threats of the era, from political instability in Europe to growing fears about foreign invasion, made coastal storage feel risky. Roosevelt and Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau Jr. wanted something new, something inland, something that could survive a direct military assault, something that nobody on Earth could break into. The search for a location landed on Fort Knox, Kentucky. The area already housed a military reservation that had been active since World War I. It sat deep in the interior of the country, far from any coastline, far from any border, surrounded by a massive military installation. The geography was perfect, and in 1936, construction began on what would become the most fortified building in the Western Hemisphere. The construction of the United States Bullion Depository was not a normal building project. It was a classified engineering operation overseen by the Treasury Department, with input from military planners and structural engineers who specialized in fortification. From the very beginning, every detail was designed to make this structure virtually indestructible. The outer walls were built from granite, sourced from quarries across the region, lined with reinforced concrete, and layered with hardened steel plates. The building itself is a relatively modest two-story structure that measures about 105 feet long and about 60 feet wide. From the outside, sitting on its manicured lawn behind a simple iron fence, it almost looks underwhelming. A rectangular box of grey stone on a grassy hill with no windows on the lower level and only narrow slits on the upper floor. You could drive past it and assume it was a small government office building. But the exterior is a lie, and a deliberate one, because what matters is underneath. Beneath the building sits a vault made from steel-reinforced concrete, encased in multiple layers of protective material. The vault door alone weighs more than 20 tons, and it operates on a time lock mechanism that requires multiple staff members to open it in a precise sequence. No single person knows the full combination. The lock is split among several individuals, and all of them must be present simultaneously for the door to open. Even if you somehow learned every part of the combination, the time lock prevents the door from opening outside of specific, pre-programmed windows. Surrounding the building is a steel fence equipped with electric current and motion-sensing alarms. Security cameras monitor every angle of the perimeter, day and night. Beyond that fence sits an outer security zone patrolled by the United States Mint Police, a federal law enforcement agency that most people do not even know exists. The Mint Police are a small, elite force with a very specific mandate, protecting United States Mint facilities and the assets inside them. They carry sidearms, they train constantly, and they operate under federal authority that gives them wide latitude to use force in defense of the depository. Beyond the Mint Police perimeter sits Fort Knox itself, one of the largest and most heavily armed military installations in the United States. The base is home to the Army Human Resources Command and roughly 30,000 active military personnel at any given time. It has its own fleet of Moan Abrams tanks, Bradley fighting vehicles, Apache helicopter gunships, and field artillery. Any uninvited guest would need to get past an entire mechanized army division before they even reach the outer fence. And that army has been trained, for decades, to consider this ground among the most important real estate the Defense Department protects. The architects also planned for aerial attack. The roof of the depository was designed to withstand a direct bomb strike. During World War II, anti-aircraft batteries were stationed on the surrounding hills, and the entire building was fitted with a system that could flood the vault with water in the event of a breach, rendering the gold unreachable. Whether that system still exists today is classified. This decision to build the vault seemed small at the time. It was not. It was about to become the centerpiece of American financial security for the next century. By January of 1937, the vault was complete, and the largest peacetime gold transfer in history was about to begin. The operation required moving thousands of tons of gold bullion from mints and Federal Reserve banks scattered across the entire country to a single point in rural Kentucky. And the logistics were staggering. The gold was loaded onto specially reinforced railroad cars operated by the United States Postal Service, which at the time handled high-value government shipments. Each car could carry roughly 50 tons of bullion, and the weight of the gold was so extreme that standard rail cars could not handle it. The floors had to be reinforced with additional steel plating to prevent the cars from buckling under the load. Armed guards from the United States Treasury Department rode in every car, seated beside the gold crates with loaded rifles and instructions to shoot anyone who attempted to interfere with the shipment. Additional guards occupied the cars ahead and behind the gold shipments as decoys and early warning posts. Military personnel were stationed at every railroad crossing, every bridge, and every junction along the routes. The tracks themselves were inspected by Army engineers before each shipment to check for sabotage or structural weakness, and the schedules were kept classified, shared only on a strict need-to-know basis within the Treasury and War Departments. The first gold arrived at the depository on January 13, 1937. Over the next several months, shipment after shipment rolled in from Philadelphia, San Francisco, Denver, and New York. Each delivery followed the same protocol, starting with an armed convoy from the rail station to the depository, followed by verification of every single bar, logging of serial numbers and weight, and finally placement inside the vault. By the time the transfers were complete, the depository held roughly 472 million troy ounces of gold. At the fixed price of $35 per ounce that was in effect at the time, the total value was just over $16 billion. Adjusted for inflation, that is somewhere around 350 billion in today's money, and at current market gold prices, the figure climbs even higher. The gold bars inside Fort Knox are not the gleaming, mirror-polished ingots you see in movies. They are rough, dull, and industrial. Each bar weighs approximately 400 troy ounces, which is about 27.5 pounds. They measure roughly 7 inches long, 3 5/8 inches wide, and 1 3/4 inches tall. They are stamped with a serial number, a refiner's mark, and a fineness rating, and they are stacked on wooden pallets inside sealed compartments within the vault. Nobody outside a tiny circle of authorized personnel has seen these bars in person since 1974. And that is where things start to get really interesting. During World War II, Fort Knox became more than just a gold vault. As the threat of Axis powers grew, and the possibility of enemy strikes on American soil felt increasingly real, the federal government began using the depository as a secure storage site for some of the most important documents and artifacts in American history. In late 1941, shortly after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor shattered any illusion of American invulnerability, the original copies of the Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution were secretly removed from the Library of Congress in Washington and transported under armed guard to Fort Knox for safekeeping. The concern was that a bombing raid, a sabotage operation, or a full-scale enemy attack on the capital could destroy these irreplaceable documents. Government officials remembered what had happened to cultural treasures during the bombing of London, and they were not willing to take the risk. The Gettysburg Address, Lincoln's handwritten copy of one of the most important speeches in American history, also made the journey south to Kentucky. So did a Gutenberg Bible, one of fewer than 50 surviving copies of the first major book printed using movable type in Europe, dating to the 1450s. These priceless objects sat alongside the gold bars in the fortified compartments beneath the Kentucky hills, protected by the same 20-ton vault door and the same military perimeter. And it was not just American treasures. During the war, the crown of St. Stephen, the Holy Crown of Hungary, along with other Hungarian coronation regalia, was entrusted to American forces and eventually stored at Fort Knox for protection. The crown stayed there until 1978, when the United States returned it to Hungary in a diplomatic gesture that made international headlines. There were also rumors, never officially confirmed, that Fort Knox housed reserves of morphine and opium for military medical use during the war. The logic was that a secure inland vault was the safest place for strategic medical supplies in the event of coastal invasion. Whether these substances were actually stored, there remains a matter of debate among historians. But the documents and the artifacts eventually went home. The gold stayed. And as the decades passed, an uncomfortable question began to creep into public conversation. Was the gold actually still there? The conspiracy theories started small but grew steadily. In the 1960s, a few financial writers and libertarian economists began asking why the government had never conducted a full, independent audit of the gold reserves at Fort Knox. The Treasury Department maintained that the gold was there, that it was accounted for, and that no audit was necessary. But the lack of transparency fed the skeptics. Some theorized that the gold had been quietly sold off to cover government debts. Others suggested it had been leased to foreign central banks and was sitting in vaults in London, Zurich, and Frankfurt, not Kentucky. A more extreme camp believed the gold had never been there in the quantities claimed, that the whole operation had been a financial illusion from the beginning. By the early 1970s, the doubts had grown loud enough that they could no longer be brushed aside. A congressman from Virginia named Philip Crane began publicly demanding an inspection. He argued that the American people had a right to know whether the gold that was supposed to back their financial system actually existed in the quantities reported. Other members of Congress joined the call, including several on the banking committees. Editorials appeared in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. The pressure mounted until it became politically impossible to ignore. In September of 1974, the Treasury Department finally agreed to open the doors. A delegation of 12 congressmen, one senator, and a small group of journalists and gold industry experts were allowed inside the depository for the first time since the vault had been sealed decades earlier. It was, without exaggeration, the most exclusive tour in American history, and it remains the last time civilians have entered the building to this day. The delegation was led by then-Director of the United States Mint, Mary Brooks. They entered through multiple security checkpoints, passed through the vault door, and were shown several of the sealed compartments. A small number of compartments were opened, and the group was allowed to visually inspect the gold bars inside. Reporters described the sight as overwhelming. Rows upon rows of dull, heavy gold bars stacked in dim, cramped compartments, stretching back into darkness. But the visit was tightly controlled. The delegation only saw a fraction of the total compartments. They were not allowed to independently weigh or assay any of the gold. They could look, but they could not touch, test, or verify. The entire inspection lasted roughly an hour. For some, the visit settled the question. Congressman Crane told reporters that he was satisfied the gold was there and that his concerns had been addressed. But for others, the visit raised more questions than it answered. If the gold was really all accounted for, why not open every compartment? Why not allow independent auditors to weigh and test the bars? Why was the inspection so brief and so restricted? Pay attention to this next detail because it explains everything about why the conspiracy theories never died. After the 1974 inspection, the vault was sealed again, and it has not been opened to outsiders since. That is over 50 years of silence. Not a single congressional delegation, not a single independent auditor, and not a single journalist has been allowed back inside. The United States government has conducted what it calls internal audits through the Treasury Department's Office of Inspector General. According to official reports, these audits confirm that approximately 4,580 metric tons of gold remain in the vault, with a book value based on the statutory gold price of $42.22 per ounce. That statutory price, by the way, has not been updated since 1973. At market rates, the gold would be worth many times that official figure. But critics point out that these internal audits are conducted by the same government that owns the gold. There is no independent verification. No outside auditor has ever been allowed to conduct a full physical inventory of every bar in the vault, and attempts by members of Congress to mandate such an audit have repeatedly stalled or been quietly shelved. In 2011, former Congressman Ron Paul, who had spent years calling for transparency around the Federal Reserve and American gold reserves, introduced legislation that would mandate a full, independent audit of Fort Knox. His Federal Reserve Transparency Act gained significant public support, fueled by growing distrust of financial institutions in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. Petitions circulated online. The topic trended on social media. Supporters argued that a simple audit would settle the question once and for all, and that if the gold was truly there, the government had nothing to hide. But the bill went nowhere. It died quietly in committee, opposed by the Treasury Department and ignored by congressional leadership. The vault stayed sealed. The questions persisted. Think about that for a second. The single largest gold reserve on Earth, owned by the public, paid for by taxpayers, and the public is not allowed to verify that it exists. The last independent look was over 5 decades ago, and even that look was surface level at best. Now, to be fair, there are reasonable explanations for the secrecy. The United States Mint Police and the Treasury Department argue that any detailed information about the vault's interior, its security systems, its layout, or its protocols would represent a national security risk. Allowing regular public access would create vulnerabilities. And they have a point. You do not exactly want to publish a blueprint of the most valuable vault on the planet. But this wasn't just about Fort Knox anymore. The secrecy fed into a much larger debate about government transparency, the gold standard, and the role of gold in the modern financial system. Until 1971, the United States dollar was backed by gold. That meant every dollar in circulation was theoretically exchangeable for a fixed amount of gold held in government reserves. This was the foundation of the Bretton Woods system. established at a New Hampshire resort in 1944, when 44 Allied nations agreed to peg their currencies to the dollar and the dollar to gold at $35 per ounce. It was the financial architecture that rebuilt the post-war world, and the gold at Fort Knox was its bedrock. But by the late 1960s, the system was under strain. The United States was spending heavily on the Vietnam War and domestic social programs simultaneously. Foreign governments, particularly France under Charles de Gaulle, began demanding gold in exchange for the dollars they held, testing whether America actually had enough reserves to back all the currency it had printed. The answer, increasingly, was no. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon appeared on national television and announced that the United States would suspend the convertibility of dollars to gold. It was supposed to be temporary. It became permanent. This moment, known as the Nixon shock, effectively killed the gold standard and transformed the dollar into a fiat currency, backed not by a physical commodity sitting in a vault in Kentucky, but by the full faith and credit of the United States government. After that, the gold at Fort Knox became something of an orphan. It was still there, still guarded, still enormously valuable on paper, but it no longer served the direct financial function it was originally intended for. The dollar floated freely on currency markets. Gold prices were no longer fixed by government decree, and a question emerged that nobody in Washington seemed eager to answer. What exactly was the point of guarding 4,500 tons of gold with an army division if the gold no longer backed the money supply? The answer, according to the Treasury Department, is that the gold remains a strategic reserve, a financial anchor of last resort. If the global monetary system ever collapsed, if confidence in paper currencies evaporated, gold would still hold value. It has held value for thousands of years. The bars sitting in those dark compartments beneath the Kentucky hills represent a final backstop, a guarantee that the United States possesses real, tangible wealth that cannot be printed, inflated, or deleted by a keystroke. And the military agrees. Fort Knox, the military base, separate from the depository, has been a critical installation for the Army since World War I. It served as the home of the Armor School, where American tank crews trained for decades. Generals like George Patton passed through Fort Knox during their careers. The base has trained hundreds of thousands of soldiers. In 2011, the Armor School relocated to Fort Benning in Georgia. But Fort Knox remains active as the headquarters for Army Human Resources Command, the organization responsible for managing the careers of every soldier in the United States Army. The base itself sprawls across more than 100,000 acres of Kentucky terrain. It has its own airfield, its own road network, its own housing, and its own small city of support infrastructure. The depository sits within this vast military footprint like a diamond locked inside a steel safe that is itself locked inside a bank vault that is itself surrounded by a fortress. The redundancy is deliberate. Every few years, someone floats the idea of a heist. It has become a fixture of pop culture. Movies have been built around the premise. James Bond famously visited Fort Knox in the 1964 film Goldfinger, where the villain Auric Goldfinger planned to detonate a nuclear device inside the vault, not to steal the gold, but to irradiate it and render it worthless, thereby driving up the value of his own gold holdings. The film popularized Fort Knox in the public imagination and cemented the idea that the place was both legendary and vulnerable. Ocean's 11-style scenarios and heist thrillers pop up regularly in fiction. Video games, novels, and television series have all taken their shot at imagining the ultimate Fort Knox robbery. But in reality, the challenge is not just improbable. It is functionally, mathematically, and physically impossible. Consider the layers. First, you would need to penetrate the perimeter of an active military base with 30,000 soldiers, attack helicopters, and armored vehicles. Then, you would need to bypass the outer security fence with its electronic countermeasures. Then, you would need to get past the Mint police force that guards the depository around the clock. Then you would need to breach a building designed to withstand aerial bombardment. Then you would need to open a vault door weighing over 20 tons, protected by a combination that no single person knows, operating on a time lock that only functions during specific windows. And then, assuming you somehow got inside, you would need to physically move 4,500 tons of gold. That is approximately 9 million pounds. You would need more than 200 fully loaded 18-wheeler trucks just to haul it away. And every road out of Fort Knox passes through military checkpoints. And no, I am not making that up. The math works out to roughly 186,000 gold bars, each weighing about 27 pounds, stacked in a vault roughly the size of a modest office building. Even if you had unlimited time and zero opposition, the physical logistics of removing that much weight would take weeks. The real question was never whether someone could steal the gold. The real question has always been whether the gold is actually there to steal. As of today, the United States Bullion Depository at Fort Knox continues to operate under the same veil of secrecy it has maintained since 1937. The Treasury Department insists the gold is secure and fully accounted for. The Mint Police continue their around-the-clock patrols. The military base surrounding the depository continues to function as one of the most heavily armed installations in the country. And the vault door has not opened for public eyes since that single afternoon in September of 1974. In 2017, Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin visited Fort Knox alongside Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, making him one of the very few Treasury secretaries to ever enter the building. Afterward, he joked to reporters that the gold was safe. That was the extent of his public remarks on the subject. There was no detailed report released, no photographs published, and no auditors accompanying him on the visit. The irony of Fort Knox is that its greatest achievement is also its greatest source of suspicion. The facility was designed to be so secure, so impenetrable, so completely closed off from the outside world that no one could ever threaten its contents. And it succeeded. But in building a vault that nobody could break into, the government also built a vault that nobody could look into. The same walls that keep thieves out also keep transparency out. The same secrecy that protects the gold also feeds every conspiracy theory about whether the gold exists. Whether you believe the gold is all there, whether you think some of it has been quietly moved or leased to foreign banks or sold off in backroom deals, or whether you simply find it strange that the wealthiest nation on earth refuses to let anyone independently verify its most valuable physical asset, one thing is undeniable. Fort Knox was built to be impenetrable. It was built to be invisible, and in nearly 90 years of operation, it has succeeded at both. The granite walls still stand on that Kentucky hillside, looking the same as they did when the first gold shipment arrived in January of 1937. The vault door still holds behind its 20 tons of steel and its time lock mechanism that no single person can open alone. The gold, 4,500 tons of it, roughly 186,000 bars, stamped with serial numbers and refiner's marks, still waits in the dark, stacked on wooden pallets in sealed compartments that have not seen daylight in over half a century. And the world, whether it wants to admit it or not, still wonders what else might be waiting down there with it. If this story pulled you in, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a deep dive like this one. Drop a comment and tell us whether you believe the gold is really all there, or if something else is going on behind those vault doors.